Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Carol Ruthven of the Episcopal Diocese of Lexington. On behalf of Dr. Teresa Smallwood, who is the director of the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative of the Divinity School in Vanderbilt, we welcome you. We are delighted that you have joined us. We had a wonderful and very powerful presentation in our keynote speaker, Dr. Dwayne Mack of Berea College on Thursday evening. We had a wonderful panel of compassionate, wise, and phenomenal community leaders speaking this morning. And so we're delighted to welcome another panel of experts in our community here in Lexington, in Kentucky, representing a broad spectrum of perspectives as we address this pressing issue of public safety in our communities. I'm delighted that we have this afternoon as our moderator, Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards, who is the Associate Dean and Professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Louisville. 20 years of involvement in community justice as an academic scholar. And we, as our panelist, I'm delighted to share with you that we have Shameka Parrish-Wright, who is the project manager of the Bail Project in Louisville, and also chair of Kentucky Alliance and a candidate in the Mayoral race in Louisville. We also have Keisha Dorsey, who is a council member in the Louisville Metro Council representing District 3. We have Reverend Dr. Nathl Moore of First African Baptist Church in Lexington and member of the Black Faith Leaders of Lexington and vicinity. We also have Keturah Herron, who is a policy strategist for juvenile justice with the ACLU of Kentucky. We welcome our moderator, all of our panelists, and all of you who are joining us today as our guests. I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited for this second session for me today with a host of new panelists that I hope to have just as an engaging conversation like we had this morning. So our panel today is a little bit different than the morning panel that was mostly clergy. And I will say, similar to this morning, you know, we live in Kentucky. A lot of us know each other. If we're from Kentucky, then we've known each other for a long time. So I am no stranger to several of the folks on this panel. I've actually engaged in this conversation a couple of times with some of the folks on this panel. So I'm super excited to hear them as a collective have a conversation about reimagining public safety. So the run of show for this afternoon is that I will open up with a broad question prompt. I will give each panelist, no more than 15 minutes, somewhere between, 10 to 15 minutes to kind of talk about who they are, their experiences and their perspectives and just what they think about reimagining public safety. I invite the viewers to utilize the comment section to ask any questions, because once the panelists all get a chance to speak, then I will make sure we have a Q&A session, and I will monitor the chat for questions and make sure that the panelists get a chance to answer them. I will also be taking lots of notes. I believe in the last session, I may have taken like 3 or 4 pages of notes, as did all the reverends on there. I think academics and reverends are a lot alike with note taking and using our knowledge that we gain from each other in future sermons or lectures. So I will be taking lots of notes and creating questions based on the conversation that we're having. So it's a low stakes, informal conversation about different perspectives as relates to reimagining public safety. So I will invite the panelists to come into the room. So we have Shameka Parrish-Wright, Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey, Reverend Dr. Nathl Moore, and Keturah Herron with the ACLU. So I will just, for this first part, kind of just call on you to be next. But it's a broad question of, what does reimagining public safety mean to you? So we know that safety has its connotation on what makes people feel safe, what is safe. Justice has its connotation on what is justice, what do we mean by justice. And we can all come from it and from very different lenses, which I know, we share a lot of commonalities, I'm sure, but I'm sure we also have different lived experiences and perspectives to bring. So Shameka, Parrish-Wright, will you do us the honor of introducing yourself and then just kind of answering that broad sweeping question of what does it mean to reimagine public safety?
Thank you, Dr. Dawson, and I appreciate being among these esteemed panelists, one of which is my council person, Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey, and Keturah Herron is someone that I've worked with on a myriad of issues, so very happy to be on here. I think you have a great introduction to it. What safety is for me and what it is for people of my community may look different. And so when we reimagine it, we have to also understand that we all have different levels of safety. I'm someone who never feels like I'm always 100% safe, but I always feel like I have options to make sure that I can secure safety for myself and for my family. And when I'm in situations that I cannot control, I also have resources that I can reach out to. And for me, I think that that's what every community deserves, every neighborhood, every city. And what we depend on our elected officials and our city government to do is to help give us the resources that we need and we deserve. And so for me, every role that I've taken has been a way to, I feel like we're going to work on fighting racism and racist practices because they're so baked into the American way. That's something that we're going to work on in different ways. And for me, in my lifetime at 44 years old, I like to think about what can I accomplish in these 44 years. And so I chose to, in every position that I've worked in, is to attack poverty. I think poverty is something that's tangible. Poverty is something that we can do something about in our lifetimes. And poverty is something that I can leave right out of my office building right now and go out, and I'm right near the public library, and go choose someone in there and change their life forever. And I think that I want the people that I work with to understand that there's things that we can do. There's things that we can depend on our elected officials and our local government to do. And there's things that we can make sure that we're creating a sense of comfort that most of us don't feel like we have right now. And so that programming is what saved me from violence. Programming, it didn't make it where I never had any violence, but having programming helped steer me in a better direction from childhood up, from DARE programs to programs with the Cincinnati Reds to academic programs. All that programming helped me in my worst times, even though I was a teen mom and I had a lot of experiences from living on the streets. I still was able to find resources and programming. And I think that is going to be a tool for us to reimagine public safety, programming and real investment into things that work. And so I know that even with Black and brown and poor white people, we talk about defund. People are scared of that. They're scared of that word defund because they think that it means they have no one to call. And when you have a situation where your police were designed to be everything, they weren't designed to be everything. They became everything. Every reason somebody calls, whether it's a cat in the tree, whether it's their uncle acting out, they've been everything. And now, because of that, they've assumed a lot of power and control. And when we're talking about reimagining public health and public safety, they're the main responders. They're who people call, and they're who people feel like they only have the choice to call. And so things like 911 has been programmed into us for a long time, since we are babies almost. And so we have to get away and give our communities another resource to call so they can make the decision if they want a trauma response or if they need the police to come. We get to have the community protection we deserve when we create the resources and fund those resources fully so that people can have other options. So that I tell this story, and I'll end here. I have an uncle, my mother's brother, I love very dearly, but every family function he comes to, he brings a different girlfriend. And by the middle of the night, when we're all having a good time, eating food, enjoying ourselves, he starts to argue with these girlfriends. And we end up putting my uncle out because he becomes disrespectful. We don't call the police. We take my uncle, we put him in the car, we take him home, and then he's fine the next day. We make sure we take care of his girlfriend that he brought and make sure that she's safe and she's okay. And then it blows over the next day. We know that if we call the police, and how irate my uncle can be in his words, not in actions, not that he's physically trying to hurt somebody, swinging on them or anything. It's just really his words. We know that my uncle could end up with lifetime, with issues, with going to jail, with being incarcerated, being held. He can lose his job. He can lose his apartment off of having a bad night. Now, I don't have to give you rocket science to understand that my uncle has a problem with alcoholism, and my uncle deals with that in his way. And we as a family have always tried to support him. We don't have a trauma response to respond to that. So I'm asking, and I've asked for this even when I lived in Parkland on Hemlock and Southern. I asked my then councilwoman, Jessica Green, I said, we need neighborhood trauma response units that give people another option to call instead of calling the police. Because when I met with interim chief Yvette Gentry, she gave me a packet. As the Alliance co-chair, myself, Tyra Walker, and Dre Dawson, we met at the Braden Center, and she gave us a big packet. And she said, Shameka, this is all the calls to 911. A lot of these aren't substantiated. Tell your people to stop calling my people, because when my people come, they come with guns. And when they come, they have one mode of operation of suggest that you leave, strongly tell you to leave, and then remove you. And so if they are showing up in these situations and they're not equipped to handle it, they don't have a social worker with them, a trauma therapist, a conflict resolution person. If they don't have those people with them, then they're going to respond in that same way. We have people right now in domestic situations who will not call the police because they don't want to see their loved one die in that interaction. They want to make sure that situation is dealt with. They just want to end what's going on. And so we've come to depend on them in so many ways. When I talk about taking the power back, when I talk about reallocation, I'm talking about giving the power back to the people and letting us be the community response at certain levels as we deserve. Having professionals that come into our communities, not just when something is wrong, but on a regular basis to come in and build up community, do gun safety training, gun awareness, have those trauma surgeons on these neighborhood trauma response units, letting them know this is what happened when you choose to use a gun. This is what happened when you stab somebody. We have to start giving people other options, and we don't have that. All we have is 911. And our police have shown us that they cannot handle all of this on their own. So we have to reallocate funding to things that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keturah, you want to chime in?
Yes, I'll chime in, and thank you all for having me. And it's a pleasure to be on the panel with some great minds. And I think that Shameka definitely kicked us off right and hit on a lot of things. And one of the things that I really wanted to lift up was, as Shameka said, is that safety depends on the individual. I think that we're at a time where if you ask anybody what it means to be safe, you're going to get a different answer. And so when we're talking about public safety, I think that we have to look at the whole picture of when you talk about on a city level or on a state level, what is included when you're talking about public safety. Public safety, you have the police, you have the fire, you have the EMT, you have all of these structural departments that lies within that. And I think that what we have to do as advocates, as lawmakers, as elected officials, as community members, is to really put the pressure on and redefine and start talking about community safety. And I think Dr. Edwards, you was the first person that pitched that term to me, is what does it mean for a actual community, whether it's the community, your proximity of the blocks that you're living in, or community of the people that you're engaging with on a regular basis. What does safety look like? Does it look like sidewalks? Does it look like having healthy food options in your community? Does it look like having mental health services in your community? And so I think the first thing that we have to do is really define and get down to the nitty gritty of what these terms mean and what that actually visually looks like. For a lot of folks, we have been oppressed for so long. A lot of times we talk about what it is that we don't want. And it is time for us to say, like, no, this is what we do want and what it looks like. I think that Brooklyn Center, I think it's Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, did a wonderful job after, the killing that they had there, to really define what that meant. And I believe the mayor, if I'm not mistaken, actually created a different department. And so they had the Department of Public Safety, but they created a different department of community safety. And that's where they really are digging into making sure that those public health issues are being addressed. I think that what we need to do as a whole is to figure that out. And then, as Shameka said, start reallocating those resources, making sure that people's basic needs are being met. When people's basic needs are being met, they are safe. That's what safety looks like. When people's needs are being met, police do not need to be involved in those situations, in those communities. And so it's a thing of, I know that Shameka hit on programming. We need programming, but also we have to change the policies that are informing those programs. And I think that when we're talking about the policies that relate to public safety, it's broad, it's complex, because you're talking about dismantling the prison system. The industrial prison complex has grown. We know that is what is drawing a lot of people into different funds and monies and resources to pocket the some of our elected officials, the things that are funneling capitalism. And so I think that until we also are looking at the policies that we're creating, that is even allowing the police to be out in communities of saying this is looked at as a crime, we're gonna just continue to spin our wheels. And so we have to look at the policies that are harmful to our communities. I think that part of that comes into decriminalization of drugs such as marijuana. And so it's a very, I don't know, it's a very complex, it's very complex when we're talking about this. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do. It's a lot of work. And so I'm going to leave it at there. I feel like I can keep going on and on. I'm going to leave it there. And I look forward to seeing and hearing what other folks have to say.
Thank you, Keturah. The whole policy versus programming and policy and programming is certainly a conversation that I hope that we can get into momentarily. But there's a lot to be said about the many layers related to reimagining public safety. And so maybe we can unravel some of those. But I think, as we think about the idea of public safety, it's easy to go just towards the police, because when you start unraveling or pulling back the onion layer, you realize how many systems are intertwined, and it becomes overwhelming for folks. So I think that, we maybe can have a conversation at some point during this time together. We talk about the many layers and how we can't give up just because, we think we got this. I mean, I know you did a wonderful job with no knock warrants. So we got that piece of the onion peel back. Look at this behind it, and it feels like, I know in your policy work, I'm sure it feels like that all the time. So I am going to shift it over to Reverend Nathl Moore. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, what you do, and your thoughts on reimagining public safety?
Good afternoon, Dr. Elwes. Thank you for facilitating. It's good to be here with all of these esteemed panelists here on today, and it's been a very great discussion thus far. So thanks, glad to be here on today. Again, my name is Nathl Moore. I pastor here in Lexington, Kentucky. I pastor the First African Baptist Church. I'm part of a group of ministers called the Black Faith Leaders of Lexington and vicinity. We came together organically about the May-June time frame when a lot of the social unrest was going on, to get involved in some of the activities going on here in our community of Lexington. And that's been a great work, that a wonderful thing that we've been able to be a part of and to collaborate on. For me, reimagining public safety in underserved communities. As a person with our Black Faith Leaders group, when we came together, we divvied our work via subcommittees. We had a law enforcement subcommittee because we recognized that was an area of of social unrest and injustice. We had an economic subcommittee that addressed some areas from an economic perspective. And then we had a political unit that addressed things from a political arena. And so I was blessed to be part of the law enforcement subcommittee and to do that work with those with those pastors in that area. And for us, well, for me, I began to think about reimagining public safety. One of the things it meant for us, I'm coming at this from a clergy perspective. One was that of reclaiming the prophetic voice in the public square by way of casting a kingdom vision as to what public safety might look like, whether it's from an economic perspective or a law enforcement perspective. So really we noticed that was a void that was there, and we were grateful for our local protesters who actually served as an impetus for us to step into a place to provide a kingdom vision for our group, my subcommittee, or law enforcement might look like. And so in doing that, we wanted to make sure that as we came at this, that again, it wasn't just our vision, but again, a kingdom vision. What does that look like? And so we really tried to anchor stuff in from a biblical narrative. And so part of reimagining for us has also been that of revisiting the scriptures and seeing what is it from a scriptural perspective do we expect out of our civil authorities. One of the things that we're looking to try and do, we're looking at doing is even that of revisiting the scriptures so as to provide revisiting the scripture to provide a more perspective on what the scriptures actually say. For instance, a lot of discussion in religious circles deals with Romans 13 as the biblical basis for civil authorities, right? And so in that particular passage, it emphasizes civil authorities, and they are God's divine agents. But the problem with that particular piece that we're discovering and having a nice time revisiting is that we get the piece of their divine authority, but we miss their divine assignment. Their divine assignment is to be servants to the community, and not just one segment of the community, but all segments of the community. And so part of that is part of revisiting that, and so we can bring that, because what we're discovering that even here is that many of our local law enforcement who lead are in our churches. And so if that's the case, why can't we frame part of these discussions from a scriptural perspective to say, hey, look, this is really actually what the scripture says in that. So you don't just have divine authority, you've got a divine assignment. And when you fail to benefit the good, which you've been assigned divinely for, then it's incumbent upon us now to say, hey, look, that's not working for the good of the community. One of the things that's interesting, as pastor in First African, we are a historic church. And one of the things that I uncovered in some of my research in history was the perspective of policing, because one of the ideas here was part of reimagining meant debunking some flawed myths, some flawed thinking, in that Lexington inherently did not have a policing problem like it was everywhere else. But it's interesting that I uncovered a piece of history wherein speaking about our church's second pastor and his prowess as a preacher or whatever, it was said of him, and I'm paraphrasing the quote by those who are part of the right religious establishment in Lexington at that time, that he was more potent in keeping order among the blacks than the police themselves, which meant that inherent in policing is this idea of keeping city safety by maintaining order by law enforcement in the black community. So if that's the case, then it's not about the safety of the black community, it's about the order of the black community. So now re-engaging that conversation and reshaping that narrative of thinking that says, no, it's not just maintaining order your safety, it's all about safety. It's safety for the whole community. So if one segment of the community does not feel safe, then that's a problem. We need to address those areas. And I thank Keturah for bringing up the area of policies, because that's one of the things that we attacked here by way of the no-knock warrants. And part of that, we felt that in order to create or to begin to repair relationships between the black community that policing is called to serve, is the disbanding of the no-knock warrants. Okay. And so even with that, we addressed the structural dynamic and also interaction, because community relationships are very important. And so, and doing what we can to repair those relationships, I think is vitally important. So, policies, address structure, and then ways that we can rebuild relationships among community citizens, I think is very important as part of reimagining public safety. So part of those things that's happening right now, even in my neck of the woods, in my community, that I pass an underserved community, minority community, there are community prayer circles going on right now on a bi-weekly basis. But as part of those community prayer circles, we've invited police officers, to be part of those circles, to be part of those neighborhood gatherings, to build those relationships. Because one of the dynamics that we're also noticing that's a problem is this idea that if you talk about law enforcement reform by way of public safety, somehow you're anti-police. That's a bad narrative, because you're not anti-police, you're pro-police, because you're trying to help the police to do their job better in the community. So doing what we can to reshape relationships, and it's very important. So reframing narratives are important, I think, as part of reimagining public safety. So I'll leave it there, but that's my perspective on reimagining public safety.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I think language and narratives absolutely matter. I've often been relegated to the anti-police corner, even though I teach criminal justice, and I have for 20 years, and I also teach police officers. So I'm like, okay, so you think I go in the classroom and I'm just like, abolish everything, you know? My personal opinion about things don't really matter. But yeah, I think we certainly have to remind people that the police are public servants. And as public servants, they are to be held accountable to the public, right? And I think people forget that. I mean, I have students and I'm just like, you do realize that you're going to work for the government, that you're going to be a public servant. So it's okay for people to question what you do. And it does not mean that they are anti anything. It is our responsibility as the public to hold public servants accountable. I'm a public servant. I work for, public institution. People can hold me accountable. They can, well, I don't need to advertise it, but they can get my emails, that's the responsibility of a public servant. When you sign up for that, as our next panelist will, can attest to, is then that's your responsibility and you are going to be held accountable. So with that said, Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your perspectives on reimagining public safety?
Yes, you guys made it hard because I'm at the end. But first of all, again, I want to say thank you for being here. I saw the Reverend, and I feel like I'm up in front of the church. So you say, first giving honor to God. I want to thank you all for being. Thank you for allowing me to speak. This is something I've grappled with for quite a bit. If you all see, I have no hair. There's a reason for that. It's the stress that has really come with this job. So I'm actually going to give you a little bit about myself. I came into the work of being a council person from my work in population and public health. So I am a trained public health clinician. I became a councilwoman because I was really passionate about the infrastructure of health through the lens of policy and advocacy that I did not see being approached in my community. And that's going to lead me to the basis of this conversation when you said the question is, what does it mean to reimagine public safety? So I pulled out my notebook when I was running because there were some things I took note of. I wanted to first define what safety meant. And there was a really interesting definition, but the reoccurring words were to be protected from or guarded against danger, risk, or injury. And so that inherently meant that in order to perceive or have a notion of safety, it needed to be from a being perspective, something living, something that had the ability to sense. And then that took me to, well, what are our senses? How do we perceive? How do we project? How do we intake a feeling of safety? So our senses, of course, being taste, touch, smell. And then there's actually this fifth component of the actual word sense. So what we feel, what we perceive in the environment that isn't always tangible by our innate physical senses. And so then I wanted to know, okay, well, if safety is something that I can be protected from risk, harm, hurt, danger, I have to be able to perceive that or sense it. What's the structure, going back to the onion, what's the structure in which I approach that? So the public health clinician in me went right back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's when it got real. We oftentimes talk about policing, but I have had a very challenging role in understanding my perspective as one being a Black woman, but then representing a complete cross section of this community. So I have to sometimes take Keisha out and set her on the side and then look at my community through their perspectives and lenses. And that also means the police department. And so when having some conversations and then thinking about why I got into this role, you realize when Keturah said how complicated the system is. Oh my God, how complicated it is. Because if we look at this just based on safety and we start at something just as simple as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we start with those physiological basic principles. And that's air, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction safety. So when we look across our community, if I look at the homeless, if I look at people who are looking at being evicted, if I look at people who live in Rubbertown, we have a whole part, or in the Rubbertown sector, which I live, a whole part of our city that says you're going to live 10 years less simply based on the built environment that you live in, not personal decisions or your behaviors, just simply the zip code where you reside. If we look at those components and we understand how they drive someone's health, which then the second layer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is safety. So if we look at how just the basic level of air, shelter, water, food, reproduction, how does that then drive safety? Well, I can tell you a beautiful thing. If you live in West Louisville, where I live, I've been fighting for 3 years for something called a quiet zone. And that means that trains can't come through in the middle of the night honking their horns. And I know you guys are probably thinking, what the heck does that have to do with policing? Well, let me tell you, if you live in a community where you can't sleep through the night, you're never getting into REM, how does that impact your mental status? So we're talking about children who live right next to railroad tracks that are hearing trains blast every hour on the hour for the 8 hours that their little minds are supposed to be sleeping. Well, that's children. But what about adults? And then if you live in a condition, where you live in a toxified environment, where you didn't get any sleep all night, and then you're pulled over by the police, and you happen to have a little bit of an attitude, but that police officer may have a little bit more money, lives in a different part of the community, and doesn't understand, well, why do you have an attitude with me? I just simply pulled you over. I'm trying to keep you safe. Because their perception of safety is oftentimes misconstrued with the other mixture of their role, which is to remain or to keep order. It's not always about safety with police. Sometimes it's about that little section that also says they're responsible for law enforcement and for order. So many times their perception of why they do things are to keep order. Well, sir, in my opinion, if I'm tired, I'm agitated, I haven't slept, there are no healthy food options for me around, my child is crying, not doing well in school, and you pull me over, we have a clash. And so oftentimes when I've been trying to dissect how is it that we got to this point, and what is it that we really need to do, or what are the modalities that we really need to do to evolve, to really reimagine public safety, I have to start at the bottom. And oftentimes I feel by myself down there because it's not the cold word. It's not what's popular. It's not what's sexy. It's not what's easy. It's saying, wait a minute, how do we get back down to the basics of giving people the formational, psychological resources that they need in order to get to the point where safety in that perspective, being safety in your perception and your personnel being, safety in your employment, that you have a job to go to, safety in your resources and your health access. I feel as though, Dr. Dawson, we have not had the ability to even master the psychological needs of our community. And we're actually skipping to safety without first establishing the fact that we haven't gotten the basics right. And so when Shameka talked about her uncle, that is a basic psychological need of someone who needs help and access. And so automatically, as citizens, and we may be at a higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, she immediately said, wait a minute, his safety is in danger. But the clinician in me said, wait a minute, his psychological senses are in danger. And they're in danger. If those are in danger, everything else above his psychological realm is also in danger. So his sense of love and belonging, his sense of self-esteem, all those are threatened because the very basic premise is broken. And that's what I see before we even reimagine public safety. I think we have to get the very basic step established, and that's making sure that we have those basic needs met. When we talk about policy, what's really interesting is also understanding policy in the form of where we're approaching policy change, who we are approaching about policy change, and what's their ability to influence that. So one of the most disappointing things when I got to the Metro Council is to realize we are in what's called a mayor strong city. And much of what we do from the council perspective can be very, very arduous because we do not have the ability to administer, even though we have the ability to legislate. So something that I did when I first got in is I wanted to know how many of all of our policies, which we call ordinances, were actually used in the court of law, so that I could understand like what's going to be my potency and purpose when I get into office. So we have a couple hundred on the books, but when I pulled Jefferson County court court system, when I pulled their references, only 7 of our couple hundred ordinances have ever been used in the court of law. At the local, in the court system, they actually use KRS, which is our state law, not our local ordinances. So the potency of much of what we do, even from the perspective of law enforcement, is very low. Where we're probably used the most is actually in code enforcement when it comes to property management, and believe it or not, animal services. So that's where our ordinances are used the most. So I said, okay, well, we're only using about 7 ordinances out of a couple hundred. What's the frequency in which we're using those ordinances? So for the past 5 years, I think it was something like 100 and something references to the 7 ordinances that were referenced in Jefferson County court system. And out of that 100 and something, almost 70 was an ordinance that passed, I think, a year or 2 ago regarding panhandling. So I'm like, well, my goodness, how are we even using laws? And the most relegating portion for me, and I should say resonating, is something, for example, that I'm even learning as a councilwoman. I wanted to deep dive. I heard mayoral candidate Shameka Parrish-Wright talk about needing to have mental health. And I wanted to take a deep dive and understand some exploration and how we would get into some different things. And I quickly learned that even when I pay for and draft and administer a contract and put the money over to the city, because as a legislator, I cannot have a contractual relationship. I have to depend on the administration. I am actually at the point where I'm ready to sever a contract, because even after I paid for it and created an agreement, sent the money over to the administration to have that agreement reviewed and administered and researched, what I asked for and how I asked to be included was not administered in that way. And then I, have found myself in a legal tussle with the administration Because even though I can pay for something, ask for it, advocate. Once I send that money over, I talk to the sponsor and they said, well, listen, my contract is with the city of Louisville, not with the legislative branch, because we can't administer. And so oftentimes the challenge, even when it comes to safety and policy, is educating our folks on the limitation and where to go. The beautiful thing about the mirage of candidates, and I'm so happy we have a huge cross section, is to really show this community that where the power lies in various communities. In some communities, it is very balanced. In this community, it's extremely unbalanced. And so I oftentimes want to empower my folks on how to use the system to their advantage, how to know who to advocate to and for what. The council, I tell people, can pass laws and money and put money places all day long. But if there is not an administration that can proctor that, it is sit there. I was a big advocate for youth funding almost a year ago, and we just now stood up a program that I allocated funding for almost a year ago. And again, I'm severing the contract because it was not proctored the right way. Understanding when you said, Dr. Dawson, that open records are applicable to the legislative branch, but not the administrative branch. So oftentimes, even when these reports are coming, I spoke about Rubbertown earlier, huge report that was done and paid for by this community. But the final report isn't necessarily what the community thought. And so when you want to do an open records request to say, so tell me what all those integral stages look like, or those stair steps or milestones, what information was found. I don't want to see the final report. What I want to see is all the work that was done to compile the final report. It's not accessible by the public because it's done on the administration side. So all those types of things, when you talk about policy and advocacy, are important to understand when you're fighting a system that was created to keep you out of it. And as you enter, understand that as you go through one door, the door sometimes closes behind us so that we can't circle back around and get into it. And the rules change as we learn them. And that, to me, when we talk about reimagining public safety, I'm going to end in saying, I think we first have to understand and have a really keen sense of how this started. When I went back to look at what a police officer did, that one piece of their role really stuck with me, which is maintaining public order and maintaining law. Laws evolve, but they are definitely defined. They are articulated. The sense of safety is one of protection. But the one thing I've never really understood is, what does it mean to maintain public order? And something about that feels as though that gives you the right and or permission to use your perception, bias, and interpretation of what order is and who needs to be maintained based on your personal ideation. And therein lies the danger, and why I feel as though this community is so focused on police is because the one entity that has the ability to arrest our freedoms, the very thing that makes us American, has this very, very large, flexible part of their role that says maintaining public order. And that's the one piece when everybody talks about, abolishing the police, I have to realize I have a cross section of folks, and folks don't want the police to go. What I say is we need to tie that down. We need to redefine what it means to be policing. We need to understand that we need to then define and then put in specific measurables and specific points in which we remove a lot of the flexibility that brings bias into the picture when it comes to how you interact with the public. So I'm going to end there, because if you give a politician a stage, we tend to take advantage of it. But when I think about what this should be in the future, I would love to redefine what we want out of our police. instead of letting them define what they provide to our community. I think the power of this is in the words that we use. And that's why the policy isn't so important. And I tell people, if you don't think the words are important, we have this little thing called the Constitution. And all of our freedoms rest on every single word that was used to define who we are as a country, how we operate, and how we will have and exercise this thing that we call freedom. So I think that we take their rules and we use them to our advantage. And we use this little thing called a pen, and we need to define for ourselves what we want from our policing and from our public safety sectors.
Okay, so I guess we're done. There's lots to unpack. Thank you so much, Councilperson Dorsey, for sharing that with us. And there is lots to unpack. I think, a lot of what you talked about was, related to the community. But I want to touch on one of the aspects that kind of Keturah talked about, and then you brought it into, I believe maybe Shameka and Reverend Nathl also said something about this. When we talk about public safety and like public servants, I have a tendency to, and Keturah knows this, I worry about the idea of reimagining public safety. Instead, I think in terms of community safety. And so I think the idea of community safety really touches on, Councilperson Dorsey, what you're talking about as relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The community safety is all about what the community needs. And that could be individual needs. That could be, before you even think about what safety from a public safety perspective is, then you kick in that community safety piece, which can also end up taking over some of the concepts of public safety, like you talked about. Like order maintenance is a type of policing. It is a part of policing, but law enforcement is a separate part of policing. So when people think about reimagining policing, I would say, or police reform, we need to think about what they do in their jobs and how much of it needs to be them versus somebody else. Like, do we need them to maintain order in that that subjective, supposed to be objective, but subjective police discretionary kind of way? I think a lot of people would say, no, there are plenty of things that we don't need you to maintain order from. And so all of you talked about, the concept of safety being kind of an individual thing. What makes some people safe? I live in Northeast Louisville. My predominantly white neighborhood, my bunco people. Yes, I do play bunco. Don't joke me too bad. But what they think is safe is calling the police. I have a 15-year-old black son. I'm not calling the police unless someone is really injured or going to die. Like, I am just not going to do that because I'm afraid. And so even though I live out there, I don't feel safe calling the police. I had a reporter one day ask me, well, has your son, you talk about your son and being worried about your son, has your son ever had a negative encounter? Have you? And I'm like, no, but there's this thing called vicarious trauma. And if I see another mom dealing with the death of her 12-year-old or her 17-year-old black boy, then best believe I'm going to have the trauma of being worried about mine, because I don't know who he's going to come up against and who's going to perceive him a certain way. So I know one of the things we talked about in the earlier panel was just kind of this truth telling and being able to live our truths and people believing us. And I think that goes back into community, who is believed, right? Who is trusted in their truth? So my question to you all, given that context, is, and I know Shameka talked about give the power back to the people. My question is, what about community safety? Should our safety be reliant on public safety? What role do we have as community members, or our neighbors have as community members, to ensure that we're safe? And that doesn't mean just like everybody be vigilante, groups, but like, what do we need to do as a community in Louisville and in Lexington and whatever else people are viewing this from, to make our community safe, maybe without relying so much on public servants and public safety? And anybody, feel free to chime in on that.
I'll chime in. Thank you for the way you've put that question. And thank you, Councilwoman Dorsey, for laying out the different layers. Being seen as an activist and a community organizer, we seem to be narrowed or one issue focus. And it's not that. It's just that we have so much time and and so little resources to get points across that we have to deep dive where we can. And that's where it takes, to me, the community partnership, the roles that all of you play in your community, and more. So I think how we get there, and I've been using that for my mayoral slogan, is we get there together. That really means all of us have a part in community protection, community safety that we deserve. Our faith community has a part in that. Our policymakers, our legislators, our everyday community people, our people who just come outside and sit on their porch every day. Everybody has a role in it, and everybody's paying attention. I think what happens while the police gets, while people, when they say police, and believe me, I'm saying this as someone with family members that's a police officer, someone who was a police recruit, someone who just in the last 3 weeks approved 3 new police recruits for our Shively Police Department, as I am on the Civil Service Commission. So when you read about me in the media, it sounds like I'm anti-police, and I definitely am not, in that sense of community protection. What I'm saying is that a lot of times our Black and brown and our skin is seen as a weapon when the police come to the scene. So they change the environment. And Councilwoman Dorsey, you made me think about what that breakdown, when that happens. I think the breakdown of respect, and we expect them to bring order, it changes when those who are sworn to protect and serve break the laws and violate our human rights in that process. It breaks down the trust that's been put in us from babies to believe in them, and it changes that. So when we talk about community protection, it has to be people from that community. So when I talked to Interim Chief Yvette Gentry, because I haven't spoken with our new incoming chief, which really prompted me to run for mayor for many reasons, is because, again, we're reaching outside of our box to bring the healing and the safety and the community that we need. So I was very clear about that, but not so emotional as people were trying to write me off. Very strategic in saying that when we talk about giving the power back to the community, then we have to empower the community to do so. People, what I saw at Injustice Square during the Justice for Breonna Taylor movement is a lot of our young people, white, Black, brown, Asian Pacific Islander, coming to me and saying, Shameka, I want to be lookout. I want to tell you when the police are aggressively arresting someone. I want to tell you when someone's coming to this workshop and not doing the right thing. They want to provide the protection. I want those young people to feel empowered to protect their community. I want them to be respected. They respect us, but they watch our actions and they watch what people who are sworn to protect and serve do. And that's where that breakdown. And that's when they say, I'll put my body on the line to say that this isn't right. I'll die to show them that they cannot continue to do us. I'm not my ancestors, but our ancestors were strong and did what they needed to do in their way. I think that our baby boomers worked so much on creating the what they wanted that they've neglected some things, that all the gains we've had with affirmative action, education, everything, we've dealt with all of those things in different ways, but we have not dealt with police accountability in the way that it should. And so because of that, we do have to do exactly what Councilwoman Dorsey says. We have to redefine what that policing needs to look like, what that protection. I'm an abolitionist at heart. And like you said, Dr. Dawson, that's my personal feeling, but I also know that's a strategy. I also know that I can't run on defund the police alone, or I will never be elected. I have to run on solutions, because like Councilwoman Dorsey says, many of our constituents don't want to do away with the police. We just don't want them coming for everything and people dying in those interactions. So we need to have community protection. That means that there's a restless interaction where nobody's being arrested, nobody's going to jail. There's alternatives to take people. There's places there's other groups that are from the community that come in, and we pay those people. We don't just say, hey, Johnny, you do this community watch and we're not going to give you nothing. We might give you an award and call you an ambassador, but we're not going to pay you. But we're going to pay somebody else $100,000 to come in and capitalize off of your actual work, and then they get funded and then you get nothing. We should be paying our young people, paying our people in those communities, and pairing them with professionals. This doesn't happen without academia. It has to be all these reports and studies that are done. We know what they say. Now we need the action steps to put that stuff into play. And that's what people are going to believe. This younger generations, this Generation Z, they've been robbed all the way around. And we cannot blame them for not having any faith in what we're keep talking about, because we're drinking the Kool-Aid, because some of us are in our late 30s and 40s, and we actually believe, oh, we can use this and change this, and we could just create this policy. But like Councilwoman Dorsey says, I was just blown. I knew that there was something with these ordinances, but to hear you say out of all these hundreds of ordinances, only 7 of them really was taken to where they were really tested. It's been too much going along with the get along. And because mine are doing okay, because my kids are in these public private schools and they have an advantage to go somewhere else, I'm okay. My friends are okay. And so that nepotism, that changing that, really all of these political seats, especially the mayoral seat, was set up for rich white businessmen to usher in their friends' contracts and policies and changes that benefit them over and over again. It was never about community in the first place. And so when you have people are really trying to say, you gave us voting, we talk about voting as our power, and now we want to use it to change things, like Councilwoman Dorsey says, they're going to change it. You have what just happened in Buffalo, a socialist mayor won, and now the Democrats, of all people, are working to change that mayorship to some type of city manager role. So I always believe, Ann Braden and I would talk about this a lot. She was glad I didn't become a police officer. I failed the test at the end, and 6 seconds cost me from being a police officer. But she said to me, I said, and we have to fight these problems from the inside out. We have to have people. When I wanted to become a police officer, it was because I wanted to be what I thought I was going to help and change things, work on conflict resolution, help the community. And that's what I think most recruits come in feeling. But because it's so out of control and they've been allowed, and we're in a derby town, we all about our horses, the horse has been allowed to ride the man for so long that they have assumed so much power that it's turned to more corruption than anything. So I think to get to what we really want, we have to listen to the community. With that survey that the Metro Council just did that shows that the community cares about housing, the community cares about public safety, the community cares about, let's start listening to them and let the community say. And every community that desires it, to me, should have a neighborhood trauma response that has the people from that community employed, as well as professionals that are coming into those communities. So I think we get there by using what we have and reframing it and bringing the resources there that are needed. I think that we're in the middle of this thing. Folks won't let us go back to the drawing board, but we get to take tools from what's already working, what we know don't work, and then also reimagining it by redoing it. We have to draw what we can, draw the lines that we can while we can, because as we talk about this, there's people who are drafting legislation to change it. We saw it, Keturah saw it during the Justice for Breonna Taylor movement, how even as Keturah was working on this legislation, other folks were working on things to counteract it, to kind of weaken the work that we've been doing as a people. So when I talk about giving the power back to the people, I mean it all the way around, because we've allowed things to run amok for so long. But I definitely know that there should be another option for every community to call, so that the police don't have to carry all of this on their own. They told us that they're not lawyers and doctors and social workers and trauma therapists. Then that means they don't have everything needed to serve us in the best way. And I think that the biggest message to send to our young people, our Generation Zs, is that we realize we made a mistake. We've given them too much power. Let them be a part of the solutions to changing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have a comment about community role and safety?
Dr. Dawson, I want to just briefly say something. I remember being in Justice Square during the protest, and many people, I said I actually thought it was a revolt, because it was more than a protest. It was a rebooting of the system. And so to even call it a protest, to me, dilutes its potency. But I remember the order that was there and the self-checking. I saw the aunties, what I call aunties in the movement, out there when kids were getting a little bit too rowdy. And I mean too rowdy, meaning just out there around the energy, because they were excited about the energy, but not necessarily knowing how to harness that. To really keep the momentum going. And I saw those aunties taking those babies and just saying, now you know. And so when you were talking about the community's role in policing, I don't think the community has a role in really law enforcement, right? But the community definitely has a role in order, and the community definitely has a role in public safety. Part of that, I think, is empowering this community to step up into that in which they have the authority to exact. When you see a child, doing things out of the norm. And I don't know when our community changed, because we used to have villages, whether it be through the church or whether it be through strong neighborhoods, that we had our own sense of what we called policing, but really what it was a village, and that village self-regulated. And so I laugh because people used to talk about especially my mama. She was like, if you got in trouble at school, teacher would get you, then you waited for the neighbor would give you a tongue lashing. Then by the time you got home, you had a third one from your mother or father, because you then embarrassed them. And then if you were like my daddy, he used to say, if you act a fool at school, I'm gonna act a fool with you. So he used to go back to the school and sit in the classroom, be like, oh my God, my dad is here. But we have somehow lost that community sense of self-regulating. I don't know where we lost that, because at some point I think it became inherent for our community, because we had evolved out of slavery and we knew that we could not trust the traditional systems to protect us. So we had a village type of system to protect ourselves. And so those systems that my mother came in through, she grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, there was no policing. There was self-regulating. If you stole from somebody's house, it was going to be a group of guys who found out who did that, and they were going to take care of it. Because it may have meant you got your butt kicked down the street by a group of men in the community, but you weren't going to do it again. And to Shameka's point, you knew who those folks were who had issues. And when that person or people may have come down the street, the whole community racked up. My uncle used to have a shotgun that sat at the door. It wasn't going to be no mess. And so I don't know, Dr. Dawson, where especially the African American community lost that sense of village. We had it, and we had to have it, because the only way we protected ourselves post-slavery, post-segregation, post-Jim Crow, we weren't calling the police during Jim Crow. And so that's why I'm wondering, where did we lose it? Because we had something that worked for us. Now, I'm going to take off Councilwoman Dorsey for a second and put on Keisha, whose father was a true radical. He says, well, Keisha, we lost it during integration. When we diluted our communities, then we lost our sense of identity, because our identity was based on community. When integration came, when I went to a white school, when I no longer had a Black teacher, then those cultural norms began to shift, and we started losing that sense of village. But Dr. Dawson, somewhere in my head, I know that we have the key to it because we've possessed it in the past. My question is, how do we access it now? Because it's not something that we need to find. It's not something we need to create. It's something we need to find, because we had it and our lives depended on it in the past. And I'm wondering, how do we access it to reinstitute that, because we are now back in the same situation?
Yeah, I agree with your dad. I was going to say assimilation. That's what happened. When we got opportunities to integrate, and we, assimilate into the thought, that the dominant culture used, and no, we didn't have access. I know the last panel we talked about mental health and like how churches, become the places for people to bring their problems. Well, we didn't have access to psychologists and psychiatrists. We didn't have mental health wasn't a thing for a therapist, wasn't a thing. It still is a difficult thing for people, Black folks, to be like, I'm going to go to therapy, And so, yeah, I think it's very much rooted in those moments of assimilation and integration. And you're right, we had it, and that means that we can hopefully find it back. And so I want to dovetail off of that, because my next question, and feel free anybody to go back to something if we move forward. My next question is about kind of that, right? So if there was an assimilation where we're like, oh, we now can call the police for stuff too. One of the things that I found in, some of my research on restorative justice, and particularly restorative justice with Black youth and Black communities, is that there are times in the data where it shows that Black folks are resistant to alternatives to public safety. Like, and it may be a public education need, but restorative justice is often a voluntary process, right? So if something was stolen from you, if there was some graffiti, and I'm talking about with young people, and Keturah would be very familiar with this too, but you have to volunteer. You have to say, you know what, I don't want this juvenile to go through the regular juvenile court. I'm going to do restorative justice. They qualify for that. We say no more often than other folks. We want them to get punished. We want them to go, and I'm not saying everybody, I'm just saying statistically in our local data, it has been that people are saying, no, I don't want to do restorative justice. I want them to do that. So using that just as a little, example, not saying that it is generalizable, because it is absolutely not generalizable. How do we get citizens? How do we get us to buy into alternatives for public safety, to learn different mechanisms for conflict mediation, to learn that there are other ways to seek out justice, that, you aren't going to get everything back that you lost, but you were harmed and we want to fix the harm? Like, how do we reprogram or re-educate our community to think the justice system is not the only toolbox we have for redress and repairing harm? What do we do?
I will jump in. I think that's very tough. I think that when you're looking at the historically what has happened, I think that we as a society, as a Black community in general, have gone to this punishment. We have been conditioned almost to think that the answer is punishment. And what are those consequences? Even when you look at people raising their children and somebody doesn't do anything, it's straight to your own punishment. You cannot, and it's always like, what's the consequence? And I think as a people, we think about things in this manner of there always has to be a consequence. And so I think that right now in society, what we're missing is that piece of like, what is redemption? What does it look like to teach? What does it look like to have real transformative practices, whether it's within families or within communities, or even within the church? And I look forward to hearing what Reverend's got to say about it, because I think that the Black church plays a huge role right now in us shifting, right? And so I think that it's complex. But when you talk to people of somebody broke in my car, people want people to be punished for that, because it's that individual harm that's been done. And so I think that we have to take a deep look individually about what that means if harm is created to us as an individual. And then, push that out. What does that look as to the community? And back to, the question that you had before, I think that we in the community are still creating and have that village. I mean, I know that there's people still raising other people's kids. I've got my partner's sister still on Sundays makes big Sunday meals and feeds several people in the community. And so I think that those things are happening. It's just not happening at the levels before. But I think what we have to keep in mind and remember is that during the Civil Rights Movement, the government was very intentional on breaking down the Black community. And so we have to go back and talk about policy that they intentionally broke down those villages and separated us and pinned us together and created informants. And so we have people who we thought that was with us, who the government then said, no, I need you to go in and break down these things. And so our leaders back in the day, and just our communities, it was broken down by those policies and by the government. And so I think that, again, all of it is very layered. But I think that some of that togetherness and the things that the community we're still taking care of each other. It just doesn't look like the way it used to look. And of course, we still don't have the resources. And I think that the issues are so much broader. And then you do have those people who have assimilated and want I think in the Black community, you have all these layers. You have the people at the very bottom who I think that we always need to be thinking about and talking about whenever we're moving work. And then you have the folks in the middle, and then you have the folks who have all the access and power to the money and to the resources. And so it's a very complex thing. And until we as people, when we're making decisions and we're thinking about things, we're thinking about those folks. And I hate to say it that way, I don't want to be offensive, but we're talking about the folks who are at the very bottom, who don't have resources, not the people that we know, oh, let me call you, such and such is having a program, put your kids into it. You know, like a lot of our kids, we're going to be okay regardless. I like to say that. And I hate to say it that way because of the trauma, Dr. Dawson, that you was talking about. But there's a lot of us who we are going to be okay. But what about those folks that are at the very bottom? And I look forward to hearing what Reverend has got to say.
Thank you. Re-education in some aspects is one dynamic, but to some aspects, it's not even re-education. It's just educating in general. And so if one thing that we discovered as we were going through some things, how uninformed our community was on issues that were impacting them. And so as things were beginning to take place and shape, we just noticing our need to just basically communicate. I think someone mentioned earlier the role of advocacy. You know, our community not knowing how to maneuver or where to go to get certain stuff done and how to make the system work for them. So that role of advocacy is important. But again, this aspect of punitive versus transformative or restorative, and realizing that even the punitive, when administered appropriately, should lead to restorative practices. And so when we isolate the punitive only something punitive without really defining what punitive is designed to do, even though we want to get away from only just the punitive, I think that's still part of redefining terminology. I think that was mentioned earlier. And as we redefine terminology, also define even in our community, what are the other avenues that will help build our community as opposed to just those punitive dynamics that are there. But I want to pivot off of something by way of community, because also, again, we still live under the impact of policies that affects our community. Even those at the lowest of lows in our community, they're under those policies that really affect them the most. And so for us, and one of the things about community that I want to hit on, not just our community, but one of the roles we feel like just not only our role to help our community, but to challenge those outside our community. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that we discovered is that in order to change some of those policies that impact all of us, even those at the bottom, it takes others from other areas of the community to say, hey, look, you may not think it's in your community, but it still affects your community. Your responsibility to be just as concerned about what's going on over here, just as it is over there. One of the greatest impacts that we saw when we came together to do our first initial press conference to call for the ending of some things, I think one of the most powerful pieces that was put on display during that press conference is that although you had a number of Black clergy, we were intentional about calling out our white clergy, of saying, you know what, if you love your neighbor as you're supposed to, we are your neighbor. And so to have that aspect of that side of the community was significant. I even go further to say that even when we appeared, when they were getting ready to take the vote on the no knock warrant issue, one of the things that was transformative, I think, in that discussion on that night before council was not just the number of our community that spoke, but those outside our community that spoke, that said, hey, look, non-safety for them is a non-safety issue for us. And so even though we do equip our community, we advocate, we go to bat for our community, I still think there's a place of saying, hey, look, even though this is the Black community, we're all community. We're all a city. And so whatever part of the idea of justice is not just the idea of giving to one what one deserves, but giving to making sure someone has what I have or that they have what I want. So if I have it, then I should make sure that you have it too. And so again, so that's one aspect I wanted to bring to the aspect of community and the role of community in public safety. So all of us should have a concern beyond just our just the Black community, but all community has an issue. And again, I said this earlier, is because most of the people that sit up there making policy, they don't sit in our churches. They sit in the pews, listen to some to our fellow colleagues. So it was going to come upon us to challenge them just as much to say, hey, look, even though we speak in truth to power, let us speak a little truth for you. You have the ability to articulate things in a justice manner that impacts those who are sitting around the table. But yeah, so I think there's a place again for when we talk about the punitive versus the restorative and et cetera. Again, a lot of that is educating our community on the various ways that we can impact our community for the better, other than just going this punitive route, redefining and re-educating in that avenue.
Thank you. And actually, the next question was actually kind of geared towards you, Reverend Moore. So I think it kind of builds on what you just talked about. But my question, I speak a lot about empathy, in particular, specifying that empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes as them, not what you would do if you were them, but like with their context, with their lived experiences, with their voice, those things, and looking at it through their lens. And so I wonder, for you, Reverend, but for everyone else, what role does empathy play in the pursuit of justice and safety?
I think it's significant because empathy says that I identify with, and actually I would like to use the word compassion. One of the scriptures I love is in Matthew, where Jesus looked at and saw the multitudes and had compassion upon them. When we really break that word compassion down, it's beyond me feeling sorry for you. That there's a lot of feeling sorry for, I feel sorry for them. I feel, but it's when I go beyond feeling sorry to when now I jump in the boat with you, or I get down in it with you. So it's the idea of helping to carry one's burden. And so therefore, it begins with empathy, but I think empathy has to push us into action. And if it does not push us into action, then what is it really? So even within my communicate within our community, even within our church, even this aspect of faith. If we have this aspect of faith, but when we transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament, in the Old Testament, you really don't see a noun for faith. Faith is not something you have. Faith is something that you do. And so therefore it challenges us that if you got faith, you got to be concerned, you got to do it. So even for those of us who are comfortable in our own churches, and again, there's a role for the Black church. And I think this is a great place for the Black church to really step back in, because the Black church did get complacent. I'm part of the Black church. We became more concerned about filling the pews than filling the people in the pews, even being concerned about what's going on beyond our pews. So like our church has the motto, being the church in the community for the hearts of the community. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean just having a physical space in the community? No, that means being involved in the community. That means hearing the community. That means caring for what's going on in the community. Even though many of our people do not live in this community, yet we are engrossed and ingrained in what's going on in the community. So don't just see it, don't just feel sorry for it, but if you really do, then you have to jump in. You have to get into it to do what you can. Everybody can't do everything, but you can do something to help move the needle to make life better for somebody else. After all, that is at the heart of what Christ did. Though he was rich, he became empty so that he might make those who were empty rich. And so by way of the Spirit, so when we look at that, that's our call. That's our call to doing justice and being involved in our community.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or concerns about empathy and compassion in our pursuit of justice and safety?
I wanted to jump in and thank you, Pastor. And in the comment section, I see where Hannah Drake is talking about a great point on many, just piggybacking off of what Keturah said about we're taking care of us. Some of us will be all right, but all of us are not all right. And so we all must do our part. And I think we actually need a new code. What I saw also during the Justice for Breonna Taylor movement, I saw a lot of young people coming out. And I always tell people this. I grew into academia. I come from the streets first. And even in the streets, there's a code about how you do things. You don't mess with seniors. You don't mess with people's kids. It's just things, that a church is a neutral zone. there's things that you just know from that. And I think that we lack that. I think that we lack a real code that we all agree with, or points of unity. If you don't want to use street language, points of unity should be established in every community. Every community should have an understanding, and we, no matter what roles we play, we should understand what those points of unity are. So with that said, empathy is definitely everything. I think that that's a part of it. I think the eyes have it. And so I've added interdenominational. That's the Christian that I've always been. I believe that there's a place where all faith meets, and I like to operate from that place. So when I think about the eyes have it, I think about being intentional. Everything you do matters. Everything you say in these roles, even if you're a teacher, even if you're a custodian, everything that you say to someone matters. So understanding how people are living, and understanding that there is a code that some people have. There's a lot of unspoken things that we don't talk about, and taking for granted that a lot of our young people, and even some that are older, don't operate like that. They're just surviving. And so I've been in my 40s focusing on thriving, and that looks different. But anyway, when I say the eyes have it, I mean, we have to be intentional. We have to be interdenominational, intercultural, intersectional, intergenerational. And that means that our identities have expanded. That means, yes, I want to make sure that me and my kids and my grandkids do well, but I do care about what happens to the neighbor's kid. I care about what happens to a kid in Portland community, a kid in the East End. What I saw during this movement was that a lot of those kids were coming here. Their parents could feel some way. They could have called us rioters and looters and all of those things. But I used to say to them, you're saying all of that, but your kids are right down here on the ground with us because they get it. I actually think our young people get it. They just don't have a unified code to operate from, and they're watching us, and they want to take the good things we do and they want to do away with the bad. So they're not going to be complacent. They're not going to just assimilate. They're not going to just go along. They won't just hang in. They don't have the same staying power we do to stay with crappy jobs and deal with crappy management. They will quit, they will leave, and they will put their bodies on the line. So I think we need to consider that when we're being empathetic, that we have a whole generations of young people who haven't found what they needed to grasp onto. I've often said, as a mother of 6, a lot of things have been demystified. Believing in holidays, believing in a happy ending on a story. All of those things have been broken down, and our young people can literally get on the internet and see somebody beheaded, get on the internet and see a lack of respect of life and in culture. And so they're taking in way more, and they don't have a way to process that in a safe way without standing out. And they need to know that there is a code. So I actually think we need a new code, a new point of unity that we all agree on. And we understand that if I use McDonald's to feed my children. Also, when I didn't have internet, that's how we got on the internet. Yes. On the other hand, there's bad food. There's a food desert. I lived in Parkland. I lived down the street from the McDonald's on Broadway in the West End, but that was what we had. And how to make that better, how to create more resources for people to go to and show them that we haven't forgotten about them. So yeah, the short answer is empathy is everything. And I think the eyes have it. We have to make sure that anything that we do is inclusive, intentional, and we bring people to the table that may not agree with us, but have a different perspective that we need to consider.
Thank you. So I want to do one last pitch to the viewers to submit any questions, because I'm actually almost out of questions. And I think it's because our panelist was so great that when you all did your intros, you answered my question. So I didn't want to pretend like you hadn't. So I'll give them a couple seconds or so to post the question. But while I'm doing that, I'm just going to ask another we opened with a very broad question. I'm going to ask a very ending broad question. And I'm going to ask, do you believe in true justice reform? Do you believe in true justice reform? And you can wear whatever hat you want to wear. I'm assuming that, some of us are going to wear certain hats. And we all have many hats, right? As a mom, I can be very honest. I struggle. I really, really, really struggle. As a professor, I'm more inclined to believe that it's possible, because I can educate people, to be hopeful for change, even if it's a small segment. But, I think we wear different hats and have to look through those lenses. But I know it's a big question, but do you believe in true justice reform?
I'll jump in first and say yes. I have to believe it. Part of what I'm grounded in is this idea of the let thy kingdom come, and we serve a God of justice. And when we look at even some dynamics of Scripture, He's revealed as the God of justice, and whatever He's doing by way of bringing upon His kingdom is justice reform, where things are going to be made right. And I don't believe that we have to wait until the kingdom comes in its totality to see reform. I believe we can see it right now. And that has to be the thrust. That was part of the thrust of the civil rights era. Even though they have facing that monumental task, they believed that they shall overcome. And we still believe. And I think, so yes, I totally believe it. Have to believe it, because if we don't believe it, then if those of us who are leaders don't believe it, then those who we're trying to make life better for, neither will they be as well. So in order for the community to care, we have to continue to show forth that we do believe justice reform is possible. Again, I'll just use us here in Lexington right offhand. There were many when we made our first pitch to the mayor, to our chief, to our various economic entities in Lexington, that these are the things that we're asking for by way of equity and reform. There were many who were like, well, yeah, y'all just made a pitch. That ain't gonna happen, And so, but we stayed with it. We stuck with it, and we don't know what will come down the pike. But what we do know is that the issue of no knock warrants that we were asking for the ban on, it did happen, and so that lets us know that even though the others doubted that could take place, we believed it could take place. So I just believe that yes, true justice reform can take place. We just have to keep at it and keep on pushing.
Thank you for that, Councilperson Dorsey.
Yes, I wanted to piggyback because the church girl in me was like, yes. Like, when you said true justice reform, I started thinking about faith. And Pastor Reverend was exactly right. At the point where as an elected official, I lose faith in that process. I no longer need to be representative of people. I've had to give myself permission, though, to be disheartened, to be heartbroken, to be discouraged. But I've also had to find tools to pull that back together, and to put that into the proper perspective. And because I've grown up a church baby my whole life. I was raised in the church. And so I reflect back to something the pastor said, because I always thought about when I haven't been able to see justice administered, I still have the faith to believe that when the kingdom comes, that will be the final justice. And so sometimes that is my grounding point, is to realize even when justice doesn't look like what I think it should look like at the time I think it should be exacted, that I have to believe that in my forward momentum, that there is still justice coming. And that, as Pastor said, sometimes that may be when the kingdom comes, but in other times that may mean in my continual pursuit until the kingdom does come, occupying until he comes, is still my work and progression towards justice. I wanted to say something else too in regard to perspective. Everyone's perspective of justice looks different. And something I wanted to slide in is everyone's perspective of what this ultimate outcome of unity and public safety. Everyone has a different perspective about it, and I'm gonna step on some toes. But one thing that it has really become evident to me is even within the Black community, we have various perspectives of that, and to give ourselves permission. You all forget my mama's phone. To give ourselves permission to be able to allow my sister to have a different perspective than me. the Black community is not monolithic. And I think either Keturah or Shameka said that. We're not monolithic in how we operate. My opinion is going to be different than my sister's opinion or my brother's opinion because of our perspectives. But to understand that this isn't necessarily about having the same perspective, but having collaboration and using that collaboration to continue the pursuit, the ultimate goal. We have different pathways of getting there, and ultimately sometimes I think we attack each other based on the route rather than based on the goal or the end destination. And so if I see the destination and Shameka sees the same destination, but we see two different routes to get there, it doesn't mean that she's right or wrong. And to make sure that we are okay with understanding that we're going to have those differences and being okay with even understanding our personalities may not even match. But I don't know what rapper said it, but I was on Instagram one day and he said, I don't have to like you. I don't even have to, get along with you, but I'm going to make sure that, you're going to eat when I eat. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to harm you in the process, even though we don't agree. And at the very least, when we were talking about restoration and love and empathy, I think if we can just agree to that, regardless of where we fall in our misunderstandings, our personalities, we're not all going to get along. Sorry, Rodney King. But at the end of the day, if we can believe that we aren't going to harm each other as we reach towards this new pursuit, then that will be the key for me. But I do have hope. And not only do I have hope, I believe we have the intellect and the energy to get there. I just don't know in what timing we will achieve it.
Yeah, I want to jump in really quick, if you don't mind. I deeply believe that I don't think that I will see the justice that I would like before my time is up. I think that when you look at the folks who have fought before us, I think that the vision that they have, I don't think it's the world that we're living in today. And so I think that the work is great. The work is mighty. Even with the legislation that we were able to get done last summer, the no-knock warrants, to me that was a piece of low-hanging fruit. That in the midst of everything that was going on, it was not even a drop in the bucket of what we really needed to be dealing with. And so it's a lot more that we're going to have to see in order for us to get justice. And I even oftentimes even wonder and ask myself, what is justice? I've never seen justice in my lifetime. I remember being young and hearing about Rodney King. And so I can't even imagine, Shameka was talking about how young people can look on their phones. I can't even imagine seeing it in the time frame that we see things now being that young. And so I think that when we look at the expansion of our lives, and I think that we all may be close in the same age, maybe 5 so years apart, 10 years, I don't know. But I think that I can honestly say that in my lifetime, I don't know that I've ever seen a just society. I don't know that I've ever seen a just Kentucky. And what that looks like, I'm not sure. And but I know that it's my job and my duty as I'm here is to continue to do the work and planting seeds and doing what I can do while I can. But also keeping in mind that when we're doing this, or when I'm doing this work, that I'm fighting for a world for our young people. And so it's not how do we as leaders and as adults keep in mind that the world that we're fighting for is not for us, it's for 2 and 3 generations down the road. And so that's kind of how I am able to keep moving and doing the work. But I deeply don't think that I will ever see that before my lifetime. I mean, unless I'm going to live like a long, long, long time.
Thank you.
All right.
Shameka?
Thank you. I'll add Keturah. Thank you. You took some words out of my mouth. I love Dr. I always say Dawson Edwards, that you expressed wearing the many hats. That's important to recognize, especially as we are in the community and we're showing up, but we also need to show up for our families, our friends, our loved ones, our faith community. So for me, as an activist and community organizer, I definitely believe the arc bends towards justice. Like those who have gone before us, our leaders fought for that. I even started voting because I said people died for that. Even when I didn't have a political identity when I first started voting at 18, for me, it was important to do it because people died so I could have that right. And that I see voting as a tool, not the only tool. I see organizing as a tool, not the only tool. I see faith, all these pieces are tools for change, and it's up to us to grab on to what makes sense for us. With that said, quality of life is important, right? When I think about this run for mayor, it's about us not having a sense of normalcy, and it's nothing that we can count on. We've lost faith in the system, and actually being a mayor is a crappy job because you get blamed for everything, just like Councilwoman Dorsey says. So I'm signing up for a bigger role, but as a Black woman, I've already been in that role, right? As a Black woman leading in my community, leading in my family, I fix things, I answer questions, I help things. So I'm just stepping from behind the curtain of even in this role. So for me, I have to believe in justice at the end. I have to believe in the political voice, but I also know that in that we're dealing with people who are dealing with compounded trauma, as all of you have described in many ways. We're dealing with people who wear many hats. We're dealing with onion layers. I have a host of onion layers to myself, right? You look me up, I'm an activist, but I also am a teen mom. I also was homeless. I also stayed at an organization so long at the Kentucky Alliance as an organizer that I went bankrupt. My paychecks bounced. And then I took another job, but I still stayed with that organization. So I'm that person as well. I'm that Louisvillian that has left Louisville and come back. But believe me, on my way back, because my father was sick, that's why I moved back. When I came back, I said, if I'm going to be in Kentucky, if I'm going to be in Louisville, we're going to shake it up. I'm not with complacency. I'm not with just accepting what has been laid out for us. If that was the case, I'm in a good, comfortable job. I have a business that I run that I lost money in being out there for that movement. I could have stayed still. I think that staying still is not my way. But I also respect that some people just want to get a job, come home to their paycheck, take care of their family. And I respect that. I think that when people join institutions or become public servants, it's okay to want to have a career out of that. Community organizers deserve that too. But the way things are laid out, activists, community organizers in these organizations, we can't count on that. We can't count on a pension. We can't even count that we can buy our own house. But we're out here, we're fighting for social justice that, like all of you have identified, some of it we may never see in our lifetime, but everybody benefits for what we're fighting for. Everybody benefits for the things that we're doing, the roles we play as teachers and educators. I did a summer camp for 5 years and I was like, whoa, this is just an ounce of what teachers experience. And so you're impacting lives no matter what. So why not make it better? One of the things that I have to say is that if we really want all these things, then we have to be willing to give up something. We have to be willing to sacrifice something for that village that we all talk about, that we've all benefited from, and that we all are a part of and we create. We have to be willing to sacrifice something. Maybe you're not making $1 million, but you're impacting lives of our young people. And I do believe our seasoned people and our young people deserve a quality of life. They deserve love, education, adequate health care, adequate housing. They deserve that too. And some of us have chosen to be fighters to make sure that they have their human rights and their basic needs met, as Councilwoman Dorsey says. And some of us, we don't want that role. And like my husband, he works at a metal processing company. For him, it's work, home, and family. And he accepts that I choose to engage my community, because when I almost married a preacher, I said to that preacher, I could never be in a church just sitting in the church every Sunday. I have to be a part of a church that's in the community. And so I think that some of us have that notion and we're taking that torch forward, and we need to celebrate that. But we also need to respect that not everybody is going to have the same lens and the way to look at things. Like Councilwoman Dorsey said, we all have a different vision. We need to start deciding what success looks like for ourselves, for our community, for the people that we try to serve, and also listening to them. I don't, when I see people that are houseless, and it really takes a lot of smarts to be houseless. I've been in shelters with people with double master's degrees, with doctorate degrees. Don't assume that everybody that's houseless is just like off drugs or down and out. That's a decision that some of them have made, and they chose to live off the grid. So when we buy into society, we're buying into the way things work. We have to also understand that some people ain't bought in, but the work that we do is to benefit everyone. And that's who I have tried to be in my faith. I believe in taking the message to the people. I believe in meeting people where they at, and also believe in whatever position I have is to lift more people up than myself. My kids know me becoming mayor doesn't mean that they're going to have this top-notch life. It means that we're going to lift up our communities one community at a time. We're going to unite these 80 small cities. We're going to build some things that really need to happen that we've blindsided on, like mass transportation, which we can't. Our public transportation is so bad that when you're on the bus, it's automatically determined that you're poor and you're down and out, when it should not feel like that in our city of compassion. It should not feel that because I'm on TARC, I chose to ride TARC for environmental reasons, but we don't have those options. It's past time for light rail. 20 years later, we've been focusing on our bridges, but those bridges help people disconnect from our community more. They don't bring us together. And we haven't seen the benefits, like Councilwoman Dorsey identified. We haven't seen the benefits of our administration in over 30 years, where it improves the actual lives of Louisvillians. And so that to me means that we still got work to do. We have to continue to work towards justice, even if we can't see it. It's that arc. It's the wildest dreams of the slaves. It's the wildest dreams of the leaders and all of our loved ones that have gone before us. We must continue to carry that torch. We must create spaces for our young people and our seasoned people to be a part of those conversations. And we must not forget about our growing immigrant communities and refugee communities who really bought into the American dream that many of us will never see, right? So we just got work to do, and I can't help but be a believer. I'm a glass half full. And thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you. See, I knew you all would, jump in on that big question. I think that's probably a really good point to end on. And I just want to apologize to the viewers. I have no idea why I keep getting kicked out, but I know I keep disappearing. I'm not doing anything but panicking when that happens. I'm trying to get back on. So I apologize. I think I've dropped out like 6 times during the session. It didn't happen this morning. I have no idea. I'm in the same place. So at any rate, that's the virtual world, right? And we're used to giving each other grace. So it was such a pleasure to have this conversation with each and every one of you. Again, I expected different perspectives, but lots of, alignment and synergy, which I think was produced in this session. So please keep doing the good work, even when it feels like it wears you down, which I know that it does. And I know that we're all in that together. And, where it doesn't feel like you have community, just know that even in this conversation, even you, Reverend, in Lexington, that we are certainly in community together. So that's all I have. I'm not sure if someone from the conference is coming back on to close it out. Oh, there she is. Thank you.
Dr. Carroll, you are muted.
Thank you. I want to thank our distinguished moderator and our distinguished panelists. We've been able to explore the incredible width and depth of these issues. I'm grateful for their prophetic voices, for their honesty, for their wisdom, for their passion, for continuing this work that is clearly not a sprint. It's a lifelong marathon. And we give thanks to all of you. We give thanks to everybody who has tuned in to watch this on Facebook or on YouTube. On behalf of Dr. Teresa Smallwood, the project director for the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative, we thank you for joining with us. We invite you to join in for our next Mobile Institute, which will be on September 12th. And so please follow us, and may you be blessed, may you be safe, may you be well in all that you do. Thank you.